Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'll just give a few seconds at the top for people to join and then let them know what's going on. We are here and live today, but we'll just give a couple of seconds for people to kind of catch up with us, if you like. Thanks very much for giving up your time, everyone, today. Um, and welcome to this webinar from iFol, in which we're going to be discussing three automation strategies for streamlining AP. And we're really excited to dive into this important topic, and it is really transforming finance operations. My name's Jay Viderlingham, and I'm going to be your host and moderator today. But we've brought together an expert panel to explore these three proven automation strategies that are really going to help AP teams to reduce manual work, eliminate those bottlenecks, and enhance compliance as well. So whether you're just getting started with AP automation or if you're looking to take your current processes to the next level, today's webinar is going to give you some actionable insights that you can kind of use right away. So that's the aim of today. We do want to hear from you as well, please. So don't wait till the end of the webinar to get involved, to send us your thoughts. And we're going to kick off actually with a bit of a poll for you guys. How do you currently receive your invoices? So this is a bit of a throw out to you to kind of get you thinking about this in your daily life. How do you currently receive the majority of your invoices? Is it through email or PDF? Is it through EDI? Is it through kind of paper mail or snail mail? Is it through e-invoicing, or is it through any other means? So please comment in the chat if you've got another medium with which you do your invoicing. So I'll just go through those again. How do you currently receive the majority of invoices? Is it through email or PDF, EDI, paper mail or snail mail, e-invoicing, or any other method? So please comment. Thank you very much for that. So do get your answers in on that, and as soon as we'll have those results, we'll get them to you. Look at that. Boom. 100% on email. That's really interesting, actually. Um, we'll go through those in a second, but first I need to introduce our panel because there's no point in people pontificating on and giving their insights if you don't know who they are. So Steve Delgado, Senior Consultant at Simtrax. We've got Louise Graham, Chief Operating Officer and Head of Institute at iFol, with more than 30 years of working in finance operations. And we've got David Ibarra-Martin, another Senior Consultant at Simtrax, our sponsor for today. So firstly, I'll get your reaction, guys, to the poll. David, can I go to you first? Are you surprised?
I truthfully I am, Jay, and thanks for the lovely introduction. I am most, just kind of honestly, I've had this conversation with lots of different people, and they always tell us there's a mixture of email slash PDF as well as snail mail. Believe it or not, a lot of companies here in the United States are still utilizing paper mail. So, I mean, to see that, there's, our entire audience is utilizing email and PDFs. I mean, I think that's very awesome. I know that there is also the possibility and the fact that some people could be scanning their, mail into getting into PDF. And I think that's where my surprise is less. I'm less surprised by the fact that there is PDF because PDF really is like the default and like what is used in the United States overall. But there is snail mail as well, from my experience usually. So perhaps there are people that have chosen email because they already are doing that manual process, right, of scanning those emails into PDFs, into email.
Sure. Great. Steve, any sort of raised eyebrows from you about this?
Yeah, no, I mean, really the poll tells the whole story, right? We see that more and more companies are really just going the digital method, which is emailing. I'm surprised that more people haven't, selected either EDI or e-invoicing, especially because globally, I think the e-invoicing standards around the world are a little better in the US. So I know that, we have companies that do a lot of e-invoicing and get their invoices in that manner. So
Great. And Louise, your thoughts? Are you surprised by that?
I'm surprised there isn't more EDI actually.
Yeah.
because the perfect scenario is that your invoices come in via EDI, they get auto matched to purchase orders and receipts, and you don't even see them. They go straight through. Nobody touches them at all. That's the dream world, right? And also, I'd just like to make a comment, which is that in more than one company I've worked in the last 20 years, we've had people say, "But we get invoices on napkins," and this is where this is where small suppliers or on bits of paper. So we've had window cleaners and small suppliers who just write windows cleaned and hand over the piece of
Right.
paper. And of course, an invoice is a legal document, and that's not acceptable. So you do have to say to suppliers, you can't do that. This is what it needs to be. It needs to be on the
Right.
document for it to be an invoice. So I'm glad not to see napkins in that list or scraps of paper, but I'm surprised not to see more EDI. And actually, I saw somebody commented that actually some of that email is scanned to email. So
Well, there you go.
actually, I think some of that snail mail might be in there because people get it in the post, they scan it, and so technically they're receiving it on an email, but they're scanning it first. I think there's a bit of that probably.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is a bit of a oh, sorry, Jay.
No, no, carry on, carry on.
There is a bit of a culture. Like every country has its own culture. I know that we've talked to
Yeah.
people in Mexico, and I mean, on that list there wasn't text message, but in Mexico, they're very quick with it, and they have just such a tight network with one another that they literally text, "Okay, this is what and this is your invoice." So that is also an option apparently in some parts of the world, surprisingly.
Wow. Okay. So, I mean, in terms of what we're talking about today, which is automation, lots of people still think they're in the kind of the email era. So I suppose there's room to grow and room to develop. So let's, I suppose, dive in and talk about what do we mean by automation and how do you prepare for it as an organization? Steve, let's go to you first on this.
Yeah, so I mean, automation is just making sure that those repetitive tasks that you're doing is being done by a machine rather than a human taking up a lot of time to do manual tasks. And I think, one of the best methods for starting to automate is taking a look at your systems, making sure that, maybe you might think that you're automating already, but there might be, some places that you can be a little bit more efficient. And especially for the AP side, we can start off with invoice capture, right? Because as soon as you receive the invoice, and that's when you can really begin on the next steps. So understanding where your invoices are coming from, whether, from that poll, whether that's email, whether that's through snail mail, whether that's through vendor portals or EDI, noting where each of these channels are coming from is very important steps, as well as if the invoice is being received by a person or if it's being received by an accounts payable inbox. That's also important to note because from there you can start to look at AP automation software and see, maybe you need to use AI or OCR to be able to recognize the data or, RPA to facilitate automation. So I know I'm throwing out a lot of words here, but these are things that do come with AP automation, but it helps bring up more more tests that you can then handle. So from invoice reception, you can go to data extraction, to three-way matching, to approvals of the invoice, to really integrating with your financial system, and at the end making sure that that's all logged. It's all digital so that if you do have an auditing, there's an audit, all of that data is visible.
Yeah. David, any tips you can think of for people who want to move to automation? How should any organization go towards preparing for that?
Sure, of course. I think ultimately, well, the organization needs to have a clear plan, or I guess like a diagram of what their existing processes look like. So, you need to basically make sure you understand what it is you're automating before you actually automate, right? Um, you want to make sure that you understand how data flows through your organization, how there are different stakeholders and ownership of said data. And once you have that mapped out, more than likely you're going to have a registry, a vendor master file, right, of the different vendors that you're receiving invoices from. So if you can have that vendor master file be as accurate as possible, basically making sure you clean house, have that ready and in order. I mean, that's going to already allow you to make sure that you have an automation plan in place, because if you automate something that has dirty data or, inaccurate data, well, then your data flow is going to be jeopardized in the future. So it's really best to, like I said, have everything mapped out, make sure that you understand which stakeholders are going to be affected if you do go to the automation route, and that your data is kind of up to par prior to the automation.
Sure. So it's kind of it's a spring clean before you kind of make that jump. Louisa, any thoughts before people get embark on this journey?
Well, I totally agree with everything David and Steve just said. I agree. You should document your process. How does an invoice flow through your system? But you should also look at making that the best it can be first, because as David just said, you can't automate a rubbish process, and you can't well, you can, but it won't give you that much benefit. And you can't automate something that has hundreds and hundreds of decision points. So, for example, to give you an example, I've been in organisations where they've more or less said if an invoice comes in and it's a Tuesday and the sky's blue, then it gets coded to here. And if it comes in, it's a Wednesday and it's raining, then it gets coded there. Not quite as bad as that. I'm exaggerating for effect. But that if you have a decision tree, which is hundreds and hundreds of items, that's difficult to automate. And you shouldn't have that anyway. But a lot of people have, because they're relying on human intervention to process invoices. So they'll say, oh, if it's for if it's for this item, then it goes to that person. If it's for this item, it goes to that person. If you haven't got that built into your system, it's impossible. It relies on a human knowing it. And you don't want to rely on a human knowing stuff like that. You want to have a really good, robust process where it's very clear to everyone how an invoice flows through. So I'd say, yes, I agree with you. Write down the process, but make it the best it can be, because you can't automate a rubbish process. And then vendor master data, absolutely. And then the other thing I'd add is your approvals. So I just gave a made up example of rubbish, terrible approvals, but your approvals need to be documented in a way that can flow through your system as well. So if you've got we might call it a delegated level of authority or a financial delegated authority document that says for certain values and certain cost centers, certain people in your organization can approve a payment or a purchase order or an invoice. You need to make sure that's really clear and easy to understand. And you need to make sure that's working well, because you need to embed that in your automation, really. Because actually you want a system to look at an invoice and say, where does this go? Oh, it's matched to a purchase order and the purchase order's receipted and it's fine, I'm just going to pay it then. Or to flow it through, depending on how your authority levels work. So sorry, that was a long answer. I agree with them. And I'd add delegated level of authority and making sure that's really clear to everyone. And that's quite complicated. In a big organization, you'll have a lot of cost centers, a lot of budget holders, and a lot of responsibilities for different values.
Yeah, but I suppose the goal in all of this is to speed the whole process up, isn't it? Steve, you mentioned something about invoice capture, which was really interesting a bit earlier on. What are the sort of best practice tips there when it comes to invoice capture, do you think?
I mean, I think it's really noting where, your invoices are coming from, what channels they're coming from, and, again, kind of just mentioning who's receiving it. Understanding all of this is important. But I remember I mentioned a lot of different steps that you can take for automation. And I think we have to remember that if you're looking to automate, you don't have to make a giant leap to take all of these processes and automate them entirely. We can do that in small chunks. We don't have to make that giant leap overnight. So implementing AP automation can be a journey, and a great way to start is with a proof of concept. Think of the proof of concept as a pilot project where you automate specific part of your AP process. This could be a particular type of invoice or invoices from a key set of vendors. This really allows you to experience the benefits of automation firsthand, see how it's going to work in your environment, and provide valuable feedback that can help you expand on different process. And you could do this incrementally rather than, again, committing to a whole full system overhaul right away, because doing that might take up years. And that small piece of AP automation that you're looking to do might be done in a few days, maybe a few weeks, depending on how complex your policies and procedures are for that process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. David, grab your thoughts on this in terms of streamlining the whole process when it comes to invoice capture. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to piggyback on what Steve mentioned, right? Which is the incremental adoption of uh, invoice automation. I mean, it doesn't make sense to completely scrap and overturn everything. You want to make sure that you really um, attack or kind of invest in which parts of your process are in most dire need and where the benefits will be most seen. And I mean, I guess kind of to help our audience understand, think of it like doing operation on the body, right? You go into the hospital and they identify, oh, we need to do this, this, and this. They don't do it all in one go, right? I mean, it's going to be detrimental to the health of the human. You need to make sure that you take, you do this operation on focused on, maybe the spleen. And then after the fact, okay, well now let's see how that plays out. Let's see what the recovery phase looks like. And then you kind of go for whatever other part is suffering. And you kind of go in that way. And you'll more than definitely see an improvement in the overall health of the individual. That's why they're kind of in the hospital in the first place, right? So it's the same thing. It's a data and the AP process is a living, breathing organism in a sense, and everybody is affected, even if your specific department's processes aren't automated. Everybody will see the benefit. Everybody will be affected, and the effect is going to be a positive effect. I also wanted to just briefly add that invoice automation, as is being done in 2025, couldn't be done, 5, 10 years ago. And, 5, 10 years ago, invoice automation was truthfully a painstaking process for people to implement because there wasn't artificial intelligence, right? There was a reliance on OCR, object character recognition. But artificial intelligence really is what allowed for the standardization and uniformity. And it's very much like I mentioned, back to that illusion of like procedures. Back in the day, you look at the textbooks and these procedures, they had a higher failure rate back in the day, but now they're a lot less complicated. The chance of survival is a lot higher, and the improvement process is a lot quicker nowadays compared to before. So that's kind of the same thing here with AP automation. I hope it's not too convoluted of a metaphor or a simile, but that's kind of my take on it.
No, I think that's great, and you've explained it really well. And I suppose you touched on something then, is sort of making sure that everyone in the department is on the same page as well. How important, Louise, is things like training and making sure that you're segregating your duties around the team properly?
Yeah, segregation of duties is really important fraud control, as we all know. So that's really important. I agree with what David said about you can just do a bit at a time. Absolutely. And I think the obvious thing is invoice capture, right? Believe it or not, there are still companies out there who have people typing in invoices, and that's just not good use of anyone's time, and it's not the data's likely to be inaccurate. People make mistakes, and that's not a good way to do it. So I agree with invoice capture is the very obvious one. And then if you've got purchase orders, the next one is integrating it with purchase order matching, and then with receipting as well. And then ideally, the dream, as I said, is that your invoices are received electronically matched and go straight through, and nobody ever touches them, and you're just retrospectively looking at payments that have been made. So, but yes, it's really important to bring people on the journey. It's good change management. So you need to make sure that people in your organisation understand how it's going to affect them. I think I don't know if people are quite as bad as they used to be, but people like to be able to see an invoice. And if they can click on it in somewhere in your electronic system or in your ERP system and see it, that's great. They need to be able to do that. But you need to make sure they know how to do it. Otherwise, they will just be ringing your AP department saying, can I have a copy of this invoice, that invoice? And that's, again, not a good use of anyone's time. So I think it's really important to involve stakeholders in your organisation. We're doing this. We're automating. This is why we're doing it. This is what we're doing. And this is what it means for you. And what it should mean for them is they've got better visibility of their costs, right, and their invoices. Not that they should need to see invoices at all, because they should just receipt and then the invoice should go straight through. But people still do like to see them, and I recognise that.
Yeah, I think it's like you say, it's getting everyone on the same page and everyone needing to sort of know where we all are with the invoicing process. But as you rightly said, all this technology doesn't exist in a vacuum, does it? I suppose there are people involved. So I suppose how do you persuade the CFOs or decision makers at your organization that automation does give the best ROI? Steve, I think you've got some kind of real world examples here.
Yeah, I mean, two things I'd like to think is, return on investment is always going to be a great question, especially with the audience here and the field that they're in. I think that's always going to be in the back of everybody's mind, right? Is purchasing something a good investment? In a real world case, maybe we're working on a household project and I'm looking to purchase a power tool. However, that power tool is expensive and I have to make sure that it's going to be a good investment because I've used a screwdriver, right? And the bits that go along with the screwdriver, and it's worked for me wonders. I built chairs, I built tables, I built a microwave stand, whatever the case may be. But this time around, I'm looking to maybe build a crib, a coffee table, things that have a lot of screws in it. And if I can still do that, I can complete that task with my screwdriver and all of its bits, and it's gonna take me maybe two or three times longer to complete that tasks as if I were to use a power tool to get this job done. And this is kind of where the conundrum comes. Is it worth the investment in purchasing a power tool save me that time? And for me, the answer is going to be yes, because I can use that time to spend with my kids, with my partner. That's always going to be a yes for me. And we have to think about that for the AP automation software as well. Is that AP software going to be worth the investment? So you have to ask yourself questions like, will that AP software match what I needed to do? Can it do additional things? Is it kind of like what Luis mentioned? Is it gonna work well with my team? Are they gonna be on board because they're the ones who are gonna use it and they're gonna take it to its maximum benefits? And then the third one is gonna be, well, um, how, is this AP software gonna be able to last me as long as that financial system that I'm using? Or if I'm moving, can I take that with me? These are things to consider in regards to understanding AP automation software. But in regards to return on investment, I think I had to go back to the proof of concept example where, if we start on a small scale, we can see how automation is going to work for your team. It's going to build confidence in making sure that you can proceed with enhancing your processes. As well as it's going to be a minimum risk, right? We're only working on a small thing rather than overhauling. So if something does go wrong, it's just a little bit of an issue and not it doesn't mess up your whole system.
Sure.
Yeah, and in regards to the business case, we have Accents that has been with us, and they wanted their IT and finance department. They wanted to replace their traditional paper-based invoice. They wanted to get rid of their manual data entry that they did in SAP and streamline their approval process. So, we were able to use proof of concept to take different projects and work on them separately. And it really illustrated the ROI for them because it had really achieved reducing manual work and freeing up staff, allowing their team to focus on more value-added activities such as managing exceptions, invoices that don't quite match the purchase order or the receipt. They could also analyze the finance data, make sure where in its life cycle that invoice is. So it provides tangible outcomes like reducing administrative costs, fewer errors in managing invoices, and increased efficiency. So it does provide a return on investment for organizations.
Yeah, and I suppose it's like you say, the proof of concept thing is so important. And David, it's people being able to see the benefits for themselves.
Exactly.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I think Steve hit on basically all of the, answers to how to get the best ROI, right? It ultimately it does go down to, well, there needs to be trust, right? There needs to be trust with whichever vendor or whichever person is, you're going to go with to implement this. Trust is earned, and how do you earn that trust? You earn it by, being very communicative, setting up expectations, and then as the person that you're, kind of getting for this project, making sure that they can explain it well, document it well, configurations, and if they're unsure, if your organization is unsure about the return, well then minimize the investment, right? Minimize the investment, see the big returns already in a preliminary stage with the proof of concept, and then from there, trust is earned, and you can kind of go from there.
Yeah. Louise, in your experience, is it something that people are still hesitant about, or are people on board with this now?
I think people are much more on board with automation as a concept for AP than they were. I remember the days when it was OCR and actually you got invoices sent on paper to a big company, bottom line actually still exists, but it was their model then who scanned documents and then put them into your system. It was, this is years and years ago. I think the return on investment we haven't talked about is headcount reduction. And a CFO always likes a good headcount reduction. And you can reduce headcount if you haven't got so many people doing manual tasks. Or I have also seen this in a really big organization where they kept the same amount of people, but they were just doing more value added activities. So they didn't reduce the headcount at all, but they use those people for managing stakeholder relationships and getting good metrics together and managing vendor relationships, that kind of thing. So I think, yeah, the other return can be headcount reduction, but it can just be better use of your existing headcount, not just a reduction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so streamlining the operation, I suppose, and just making things go quicker and a bit more efficiently. Yeah, you mentioned earlier a bit, Louise, about some quirks and different accounting rules that different organizations might have. Are there any do's and don'ts when you're kind of moving towards automation with this, especially when it comes to those approval workflows that kind of Louise was hinting at? David, any thoughts?
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that question, Jay?
Yeah, I just was talking about every business has its own kind of unique approach to doing their accounting and their accounts payable stuff. When it comes to approval workflows, do you think there needs to be a bit more of a kind of leveling out here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Louise already kind of mentioned the approval workflows. There needs to be, it can't just be reliant on, oh, okay, well, I'm David and I know that for this invoice, I need to give it to Jenny from so and so. And then it's kind of all obfuscated from my view, right? All I know is I give it to Jenny for this, and then sometimes I'll give it to Tim, right? And then it's just kind of crawls in a huge branch from there, right? And then as soon as David is outside of the chain, or Jenny or Tim, well then it's all up in arms and everything goes up in flames, right? And now we have days payable outstanding, like way high up, and the KPIs are all, and it all comes down to somebody being gone or whatever, just miscommunication in general, right? So the approval workflows are kind of a solution that are aimed at making sure that if somebody goes on for vacation or somebody isn't available, that there still is very much a mapping that you can go to. And ideally, this mapping, these workflows are already, automated so that you don't even have to really worry about who's receiving it and who needs to validate it. And there are business rules for who looks at it. I think Louise mentioned an expenditure matrix, and I mean that's a great way of putting it, right? Essentially, hey, if an invoice is less than 10,000, well then only one validator needs to look at it, right? Potentially, you could get more granular with the rules from there, right? Not just like, okay, well it's just an amount based. It could also be like specific. It could be specific to like, oh well, if it's an invoice from so and so, then and it's such amount, then it needs to go to this set of validators. Or it could potentially even be based on dates, right? I mean, the rules could be varying in nature. It could be date based, it could be amount based. I've, there could be so many different things. So just being able to have a platform or have a solution that is flexible enough to allow for not only the programming of these like the automation side, but also, being flexible to adjust to not just being cost based. I don't know, Steve, if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit on all the points there. It's just really depending on the policies and procedures of your organization, how it's set up, and maybe having backups. So if, like you mentioned, somebody might be on vacation, you receive an out of office email, have it be sent to the second person that's a backup. Or yeah, I mean, it just really depends, and it really depends on how your organization sees what it's going to be its best practice.
Yeah, and how hard is that to implement, Louise?
Well, it depends. I think a lot of very large, mature organisations, they absolutely have a financial delegated authority, and you've just got to put it in a system. So, or it's already in your system, in your ERP system. So they already know for what cost centre and what value who it goes to, and it might go to one approver or two approvers. So I think big organisations, it's fine. They've always got it. They've got it.
Yeah.
Smaller organisations quite often make the mistake, I think, of doing this thing that David talked about. If it's if it's this, it goes to that person. If it's that, things that are very difficult to automate. So I think it's fine. But you've got to agree it. You've got to agree it. It's got your
Yeah.
organisation has to say who do you want to approve your payments, your expenses, and it could be that you start from a purchase order, in which case it doesn't need to be the invoice that's approved; it's the purchase order that's approved, and there's an automatic match. We've got a couple of questions, Jay. I don't know if you want us to answer the questions in the chat, but
Yeah, go.
there was one talking about what metrics are useful, what powerful metrics companies should focus on in their business cases to gain approval from senior management, which I can answer very quickly, but I expect David and Steve have a view. So I would say invoices processed per person and cost of processing per invoice. And if you
Yeah.
look at the cost of processing per invoice, I think in the UK, the average is around 10 quid or something, £10 now. That's a lot of money for one piece of paper. So I think if you look at your invoices processed per FTE as well, per person, there are more. And I'll let Steve and David talk about those because I'm sure they've got a view as well.
Well, you mentioned cost, right? And I think there's always that phrase, right? Time is money. So it's not just the cost, but there's also that relationship with time, right? The faster that you're able to process will also, reduce the cost and allow for a higher volume of invoices to be processed. So that would be another one, right? Basically making sure, and you can also see that with like the DPO, the days payable outstanding, right? Essentially, if you can see a reduction in that, then you know that the automation is doing its job. I don't know, Steve, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. You'll be able to see those metrics. I mean, one thing to add on with this is, once you reduce the days payable outstanding, you're paying invoices early, like going back to what Luis said, you can work with your vendor relationships. You can negotiate with your vendors because you're paying early now that, maybe you can get a discount or, whatever the case is, you can negotiate some better terms on your behalf. So you're adding value to your organization in that sense as well.
Sure. I will get to some more questions in a second, but I want to throw out another poll to you as well before we wrap up today. So the second poll of the webinar is going to be: are there any invoices that can't go through automated processes? If yes, please let us know why they can't be automated, and a short answer only, please. So basically, are there any invoices that can't be automated, and why? So do get your kind of your thinking cap on and actually think in your day-to-day life when you get stuff, is there stuff that you can't put through an automation process? So if yes, tell us why. And if you can't do that, also let us know why that can't be the case. Because actually, I think we'll get some interesting answers on that. Because I suppose unless you fully automated, um, that at some point you're going to have to go in and manually look at stuff, aren't you? And maybe Louise, that you can take this one. That kind of halfway house is no good for anyone.
Oh, it's just painful, isn't it? If you're auto capturing them, but then you've got to go and do something,
Yeah.
or then it's got to flow through to somebody who's got to send it to somebody, and they've got to actually use thinking rather than automation. Yeah, it's just painful, I think. So,
Correct. Yeah. And I mean, I've also had conversations with people, and they've told me, oh, we went with an automation solution, but the automation is subpar, and now I'm actually taking more time to uh, you know, correct what is supposedly so you really want to make sure that you go with the right solution and that your automation is you know, it's basically not just a band-aid over, a again, here I am again with the human body, right? But it's not a band-aid for like a a deep infection, right? Like you want to make sure that you actually get the appropriate solution and that it is the fullest automation that can be. So I'm very interested to see what answers come through for why something can't be fully automated, at least from their perspective.
Yeah. Steve, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like David said, a lot of times we often see that customers or, just people in general tell us, yeah, we're fully automated, but we often see that even if they might be automated, it's like what Luis said, I still have to see the invoice. So you have to send me the invoice via email, via PDF. It's not, it's like doing double the work. So yeah, you are automating, but there's places where you can find to be a little bit more efficient, in that sense.
Yeah, and that's great. We've got some answers through now as well. So, paying honorariums do not receive an invoice. I think that was from Andrea Strudwick there. And someone says subcontractor and overhead utility invoices. I mean, is there any
Mm.
reason why some of these might not be able to be paid through automation? Who wants to take that one? Louise?
In the UK, I don't know what it's like in the States, but in the UK, the utility invoices are horrendous. They are very, very, very difficult to handle, very, very difficult to automate. And in my experience, very few people do. But what they do is they find a third-party solution provider who just checks all the bills, deals with it, and you pay them every month. So that's what I would suggest anyone who can does with their utility companies. A lot of companies buy gas and electricity wholesale. They get a company to do that for them, and therefore they just have one invoice a month from the person who's done that. Utility companies are dreadful here in terms of their billing. There's brought forward balances. You've got no chance of automating it. And I think that's worth saying, actually. No, you can't always automate something. If something is dreadful, like a utility invoice, you're going to struggle to automate that. So you have to accept that there's an element, but then you just need to find the best way to manage those, right? That's what I think. Yeah,
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean, to
and
me,
subcontractors they should be able to be automated. I would have thought.
yeah, I
yeah,
just
to
want
me, it's just sorry. Oh, go ahead, Jay.
to go, Steve, go.
No, I was just saying, yeah, I mean, to me, it's more of like, well, we don't often see these invoices. At least here in the US, it might be once a quarter, once, like for maybe you're getting your trash, taken out, and they bill you once a quarter. Same thing with electricity and water and power. It's not usually on a monthly basis, so they don't often come as other invoices would. So we don't really see the need to, because we could pay that once a quarter. It's not a very big deal, and it's not for a high amount. It's not too critical. So
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to get to one of the answers to our poll. Cruiser 3 has said that some invoices contain confidential information and they require manual entry. Does an automated system make allowances for those kind of things like confidentiality?
Yeah,
I,
absolutely. Oh, go ahead, Lise.
no, go on, go for it.
No, I was going to say here in the States we have something called HIPAA, which is sort of something that is needed in the medical field to make sure that certain information is not seen by people that are not your medical providers. And so I know that here at Simtrex we've um, deployed solutions that are completely HIPAA compliant. That may be, it may be the case that, the de facto way of automating may not be the right solution, but I mean, there's always like a secondary or tertiary option that allows for, an implementation of automation that still respects the data privacy. Whether and typically it's moving stuff off of like the internet location and more of an on-premise, like the tool set itself, the automation solution would be within a more closed domain, kind of more tightly secured, that sort of thing. That's just what comes to mind for me at the moment, but maybe you can speak a little bit more to it, Luis.
And to say that in government in the UK, there's still automation, and some of that stuff is highly confidential. So,
Mm.
actually, in a way, automating is a better way of handling confidential information and having someone look at it and know what. No, well, if a person looks at a document and there's confidential information on it, I think that's more of a risk than a system putting it through and automatically matching it to a purchase order that's been raised by someone who had access to that information legitimately as part of their role. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all about making sure the right people have the information, outside
100%.
personnel don't. Yeah.
100%. So we're
Yeah.
back to segregation of duties and access rights. So
There you go.
Yeah. So we're kind of it looks like we're kind of getting a bit close to the end of the session now. So I just want to kind of summarize some of those three key points before we wrap up. So there, firstly, I suppose the or automating invoice capture to kind of boost the speed and accuracy, streamline approval workflows to help drive productivity, and make sure you integrate with your ERP for real-time visibility and control. Before we do go our separate ways, I'd like to just give everyone a one sort of final thought to take away for our audience, really, to wrap up our thoughts on automation today. Steve, any sort of final words of wisdom from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have some tips in regards to, people that are thinking of automating. Again, we want to start small. Consider implementing in some sort of phase approach so that you don't have to overhaul your whole system. Invest in training for your team if you're going to go with AP automation software, because they're going to be really the ones that are going to use it the most, and they're the ones who are going to maximize its benefits. And again, if you do go with an automation software, communicate the success of if it's working or not, because it's going to highlight positive impact on efficiency, accuracy, ROI, compliance, to further encourage adoption of automation initiatives. And if it's not working, make sure you voice that opinion too, because if that software isn't working, then you don't want to continuously use it. You want to make your process as efficient as it can be.
Great. David, any last takeaway key piece of advice for our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I think every organization is a bit different. I mean, you'd be surprised to see just how similar they all are. But every organization is different. Everybody has different needs. And I think ultimately for them, it would be the best way to go about it is to, you know, like I mentioned early on, look at what your process looks like, map it out, see, once you have it mapped out, either do an internal audit of what can be improved. If not, go to different solution providers and ask them, okay, well, here's the information. What do you think is best for us? And make sure that you choose a solution provider based on how responsive they are, whether they're willing to do the consultative work, and whether they value you as, not just a number, but rather as a person, a relationship, and they give actionable information.
Okay, great. And Louise, any final thoughts from you?
yeah, I think also the solution provider needs to challenge your processes if your processes are rubbish, which takes a bit of bravery, but you can't automate a rubbish process. So I'd make sure your processes are as good as possible. I'd make sure your approvals are documented. I'd make sure your vendor master data is clean as possible. And just one final thing to answer, somebody asked a question: what's the sort of good percentage of auto matching? I've seen in really big organizations, I've seen percentages in the 70s and 80s of auto matching. So that's stuff that's gone straight through and no human beings had to look at all. That's high. That's really good. If you could just not have to look at 70%, others are 50%, 40%. It all depends on how good your invoices are and your vendors are and your solution is. But actually, if why would you want to touch that 40, 50, 60, 70% of invoices manually when a system could do it for you? That's what technology is for. And I'm old enough to remember the days when everything was paper. There was no internet. There was no technology. And I promise you, we're in a better place today with accounts payable. It's amazing what we can do. And I've seen a lot of automation systems go in and work very well. And it can be scary, but it's absolutely 100% worth doing.
That's great. A nice positive note to end on there, Louise. Thank you for that. Thank you very much to all of our guests today. Steve Delgado, Senior Consultant at Simtrax. David Ibarra Martin, also Senior Consultant at Simtrax. And Louise Graham, Chief Operating Officer and Head of Institute at iFol. Thanks to you for joining us. And you can find more information about what we've discussed today on the iFol website, along with information on iFol membership as well. And this webinar is going to be available on the website too, so please do share it. I'm Jay Vidalingam, and thanks very much again for watching, and goodbye.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.